So we can also look at the feet here in this one. So here in upward facing dog, if your feet are collapsing like Jelena showed, you know, with the heels dropping out, sometimes it'll sort of, you know, make it harder to do the correct work. It could go, I guess, either way, but most people collapse this way. So one of the ways, well, so this is what we want, basically, right? Feet about hip width apart, maybe just a tiny bit wider, and then basically a straight line. And then the problem is that when we're doing the vinyasa, it's very difficult to tell sometimes. So it might be worth in your practice checking, you know, at first, and getting used to the feeling of it so that you memorize what the feeling is when it's straight. And then you'll forget again, it'll get messy, and then you check. So this is how you check. You want to check by lifting and looking back like that, and then holding the strength as you come back down. Don't check like this, right? You know? It doesn't work. So you just really reinforce that pattern from here. You're pushing down through your feet, so it'll help you. And then, of course, strong legs, soft bum, but we're also trying to get hip extension, right? Making that all contribute to hip extension. So it's going to tie in to the anterior tilt now of the hips to drop the pelvis down towards the floor. Okay? So because for the hip extension to happen, now we have to let the hips come forward of the, you know, of the knees, basically. Yeah, I was practicing for formally like 3 years or 4 years before I started teaching. And then when I started teaching, I was teaching, it wasn't really teaching. I mean, I started teaching Bikram yoga. That was the first style. So it was about memorizing a script. But even though it was just memorizing a script, like teaching started to creep in to it, you know? So yeah, I had a stopwatch and then a script memorized, and I'd have to run through the, you know, the posture and the time it and count down and say the lines. But after you do that a bunch of times, you start to like notice the people in the room, and then you can't help but start to teach people individually. Yeah. So yeah, I started teaching very soon after starting to practice. When I started doing yoga asanas in studios, that I went to Shivananda studio first. I was a student then. I was a student at the university studying comparative religion. Somebody thought I would like these classes, so I went to them, and I did like it. I liked it a lot. It was like a lot of people, you have a very deep experience sometimes. The very first time you go in the room, deep sense of relaxation and connection. And then I kept going to these Shivananda classes, but I started to, you know, read more about yoga that was around in Toronto at that time where I was based, and I heard about different classes. So I heard about Bikram classes and Ashtanga yoga classes, so I was kind of shopping around. And I think I probably did a lead format, sort of Ashtanga-based class soon after, like probably like 99 or something. The first time I did Ashtanga, I liked it a lot. I liked the flow of it and things. I can't say I totally understood what I was doing, and I don't know that what was given to me really communicated the essence of Ashtanga. But I was also at the same time, I was doing a lot of research online. Back then, blogs, you know, were big. So I was reading people's blogs that were doing yoga. And I remember reading blogs for people that were going to Mysore, India, and studying Ashtanga. And I kept like checking them all the time. It was like a little, you know, it was like a TV show, almost like a soap opera. I had to tune in, wait for the new blog to come out. So I started to get kind of obsessed with that idea, the tradition of it, people going to India, studying with the master, all that. 4, navel in. 5, Chitwadi on the inhale, your head up, straight arms, exhale there. Pancha on the inhale, catch your waist, tailbone down, come up. Exhale, Samastitihi. Parsvottanasana, Yekam inhale, step 3 feet to the right and bring your hands behind your back, working towards reverse prayer. Turn your right foot to point to the back. Keep the right leg straight. And then exhale, go forward over that right leg, gaze towards your right toes.
I was a ballet dancer, so I did Vaganova style, which is sort of based out of Russia. And so very disciplined and strict teachers all my life, and absolutely loved it until the day I didn't love it and decided to walk away from it in my early 20s or so, mid-20s, I would say, yeah. I discovered yoga while I was a dancer. So we would have classes every day. And then when there's performances coming up, then there's even more rehearsals for the performances, in addition to everyday kind of conditioning classes that you take. And then Sunday was the only day we always had off. And so one of my close friends suggested that we go to a yoga class to help our bodies relax from a very demanding schedule. And so that was the first time I went to a yoga class on Sunday, which happened to be Ashtanga-led class, but it wasn't very traditional. It was like a little bit of interpreted Ashtanga. And I just remembered feeling really connected to the breath. And that was something so new. That feeling that David describes, that almost everyone often has some kind of a deeper experience in their very first class. I would say I was definitely one of those people. So that would have been 20 years ago. Yeah.
Well, because I've been teaching for a long time, it's changed over the course of time, you know, as I think it probably should, right? So when I look back, when I started out, I was probably a bit more uptight about making sure that everybody stayed within certain boundaries that were considered to be, you know, the structure of Ashtanga and things like that. And then maybe over time you learn that it's easier sometimes to give people a bit more space and let these things happen over a bit more time than in one class or something, and less confrontational and more enjoyable for everybody. So I'd say over time, my approach has become probably more enjoyable for everybody, like a little softer. Yeah, and then I think that probably comes with age, you know, and maybe getting a better insight into what's more effective too. Though I must say, everybody in some ways loves the taskmaster and loves to be told what to do. You know, if you believe in it, yeah, then you want to just be told, do this, and you'll do it. Sure. And so there was a certain power in that too, for sure. When I started teaching with Jelena, then for one thing, in my own teaching, I'm making space for another voice, and so there's another person in the room that's also talking about their interpretation and understanding of the same thing, which is always going to be like slightly different, and so it creates more, I think, a better approach, more depth, and covers more ground for everybody, and. Yeah, I don't know. I think Jelena and I getting together coincided with kind of the realization that ideals, you know, we use ideals for targets, you know, as directions that we're going to aim ourselves in. But if we try to be an ideal, we'll never truly be ourselves. And it's probably more effective to teach from our core, from who we are, instead of who we want to be. Yeah.
I find it really funny because often David becoming softer is attributed somehow to me coming into this teaching space. But it's not really that. It's really what David's saying, just wisdom that comes from being a teacher in the room and figuring out what is the best way to hold space. And of course, changing it. Because at first, when I started, I was more in the background. I was there really as an assistant.
/ enforcer.
It's true. And then over the years, gradually, my voice became, I would say, just as loud.
Yeah, you stepped into it.
I stepped into it, and that felt really good because it wasn't forced. But that doesn't mean that we haven't had a lot of discussions about power dynamics and the way those power dynamics play in the room. But the constant feedback, I think, that we receive, which is really so nice, is that male-female energy in the room, and the way that plays out and the way that creates the space. And one thing that we've noticed is that over and over again, emotional releases or emotional vulnerability is always kind of, students are much more vulnerable with me. And I think that just kind of plays into, you know, the overall way our society functions, and that we feel much more secure and open to talking to women about this stuff. So they'll tell me, and often they'll tell me, and they're like, can you now go also tell David? He should know. You know, but they've, in some instances, known David much longer than they've known me. And yet I'm being told sometimes, not always, but...
Yeah, people would much rather talk to Jelena than me, which I understand. I'd rather talk to Jelena than me too. Generally, I mean, in our shala, in our community in Toronto, it's much closer to even proportions.
I would say it's 40-60.
40-60, lot of men there.
A lot of men in our shala.
But yeah, generally, I think internationally, there's a higher percentage of women, but I don't know that it's even that. I think most of us growing up are conditioned to be more vulnerable with our mothers than our fathers. Just very generally speaking, you know.
So this is like the confusing stuff. I was born in Yugoslavia.
It doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't exist anymore.
It cannot be defined by anything because it disappears, no?
Exactly. And I always say that because in my life I've had Yugoslavian passport, and then for a long time I was a refugee, and then now I have Canadian passport, and I've had nothing, you know, in between. But I was born and we lived in Sarajevo, which is where it all started, and today that's the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina. But of course, family all over, Croatia and Serbia in particular, and in Bosnia. And we go to Croatia now regularly because we have a family home there and spend a lot of time there. So I still say I'm Yugoslavian or I'm Balkan. So being from Sarajevo and then becoming a refugee in '92, we fled to Serbia where my aunt lived. And then from Serbia, eventually we went to Canada where we became refugees again. I found that now that I practice yoga and that I do this mindful practice, a lot of that trauma has come up, and the practice itself has been really instrumental in helping me heal or move towards healing. And it hasn't been pleasant and it hasn't been easy, but it's been, I mean, I don't think there's a way around it to feel whole, to feel connected, to feel the sense of belonging. I think that kind of healing is absolutely necessary. And so my practice has helped me a lot. So I am now in my second year of completing mindfulness meditation teacher training program with Jack Kornfield and Tara Brach, which has been extraordinary experience. And I came across Jack Kornfield's work as a result of my therapy when I wanted to start reading and understanding more what was happening on the mat, and when he was coming up on the mat, why were these feelings and emotions and flashbacks all showing up while I was doing this moving meditation practice. And so that led me to reading a lot of Jack Kornfield work. He's a Buddhist teacher. He's a Buddhist psychology teacher. And it's been over 10 years of studying this. And at some point, seated meditation became more and more prominent part of my practice, especially in the moments when I've been re-triggered because of the past war and refugee trauma. So especially over the past few years, having seen wars surface again and become more prominent, and become not more prominent, that's a wrong way of saying it. There's always wars happening, but because of social media, it's becoming sometimes harder and harder to turn a blind eye. And because of my, I would like to say, commitment to social justice and willingness to turn towards it, I've been re-triggered more than once in the past, I would say 3 years. And I found that seated meditation became a way to hold the difficulties with a little bit more softness and a little bit more loving kindness. And it's this loving kindness component that I think in yoga schools and even in Ashtanga is still not very much at the forefront. It's there, it's implicit in teachings, but it's not taught the way it is taught in Buddhist teachings. And so loving kindness meditation and loving kindness practices and practices of compassion, practices of intentionally cultivating joy became really important in my own healing. And so now I offer them, or David and I together offer them as we travel and teach, as well as at our studio. We started teaching them regularly, and it's been really phenomenal. The response has been incredible. As my teacher says, we all need it, the world needs it. And I think especially in the context of the West, one of the things that Jack Kornfield said a while back in one of the lectures, he said when all of these Eastern teachings started coming to the West, be it Buddhism or be it yoga, what started coming was this idea of discipline and this idea of rigidity. So you gotta sit on your cushion, and you gotta sit every day on your cushion for an hour, otherwise it's useless. And you gotta do your asana practice, and you gotta push. But then this loving kindness component, which is part of every tradition, was just kind of omitted. And it's a very interesting cultural kind of analysis and look into what is happening. And so I believe that it's time to remember that these are also teachings, and that for any mindfulness practice to be genuine, to be long-term, has to come with the sense of softness, with the sense of opening, inclusiveness. And these are all qualities that are cultivated through the practices of loving kindness and compassion.
Never head up, exhale. Dasha, inhale, slide that left foot down and pick up. Yekadasha, go back. Dwadasha, inhale, upward dog. Trayodasha, exhale, downward dog. The Ashtanga system, we use a Sanskrit count for the vinyasas. And basically it's a way of ordering all of the vinyasas, the movements and the breaths, and all of the other information that kind of goes with that. So the drishti and the counts about how long we're going to stay in the poses and things. So the order of numbers associated with each of the postures, the vinyasa system, gives you a map. It's a way of fixing the information, you know, so that as you learn the system and do the practice and move through it, it allows you to become very, very detailed, very precise, or try to be very precise about when each movement and breath happens. And that kind of focus is really what's going to be your doorway in to states of meditation. So you know, I don't know that it's important to learn the actual Sanskrit count, but what the count gives you, you know, that structure, that's very important. That's essential to doing the technique properly.
I think also, since we've mentioned trauma, in context of trauma, what learning this structure does, it's really empowering, because it puts you back in charge and puts the responsibilities on you. And so you have this kind of objective structure that's outside of you. And then within that, you learn sort of, you know, you learn your limits. You learn where the comfort zone is, where you can push. You learn how to hold back sometimes as well. But because it's repetitive and because it's, again, outside of you, it becomes really this kind of, it provides space for you to just watch the changes, watch the reactions, watch the responses. But you are still the main actor in all of it. You know? Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important and healing.
I think in its essence, Ashtanga, it is a yoga practice. It's important for us to remember that. And what's happened now, as it's a common observance, but we have to keep reminding ourselves that we now equate yoga with asana practices, which is true if the asana is directed towards stilling the mind to reveal the true nature of the seer within. It's a spiritual meditation practice. And so Ashtanga, like any other mindfulness practice, the whole goal is to reveal inner workings in order to transcend them. And any mindfulness practice, so Ashtanga included, if you practice it and stay with it, then you'll see everything, you know. You'll see, if you're a teacher, then you'll see not only your own shit, but everybody else's as well. And that's supposed to happen. You know, it's not that we get to the end point, the place where our mind is still, or that we don't feel or see anything. We have to kind of be willing to feel all of those things in order to process them and to be aware of them and be able to differentiate our awareness from them, you know? So it's part of this practice. In some ways, because this practice is very structured, I think this is true of most the more structured meditation practices. I think it can be confrontational. It brings us against our preferences, our attachments and aversions quickly, you know, and with little comfort. So it can be very confrontational that way.
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in the West about yoga practices, where it's often attributed to constant bliss and that every practice should bring about this bliss. But the truth is that it's supposed to kind of reveal all of this, including our shadow and the darkness, which is something that we always try to distract ourselves from or run away from. And yet you step on your mat, and if you haven't dealt with it, it's gonna keep showing up, and it's gonna keep showing up, and you're gonna have to do something about it. In a sense, you're gonna have to accept it and heal and move past it, but not move past it by ignoring it. And so, of course, asana is gonna elicit all this stuff, and it doesn't have to be anything, you know, crazy. I remember my first big cry happened during a sun salutation. And I just did Ekam inhale, and I lifted my arms, and David had to carry me out of the room. It was like and I had no idea at the time why I was crying, but I couldn't stop myself from it. And that's part of the sort of cleansing that also happens with any mindfulness practice. You know, there's been so many books written about this, including the famous book, Body Keeps the Score. And so as we start moving our body, as we start to connect to it and really get to know it, we get deeper and deeper in, and anything that's been stored and that hasn't been processed in our lives, it's going to show up. It's going to come up.
Yeah, the body's your history.
Yeah.
In a way, you know, it's all your karma. And so you start to re-experience it and start to deal with it when you're in it, when you're in your body. You reveal your history, all this stuff that's happened to you, good and bad.
And then our habits too.
Yeah.
Start to show up.
Habits are, they're kind of like history that you keep talking about. You know?
I know for me, one of the big things that showed up and still shows up is these notions of not enough, not good enough, all the perfectionist tendencies, which are all trauma responses as well. And so when things don't go my way on the mat, you know, I see how quickly I can spiral into this victim mode, or, you know, I'm not good enough, or this needs to be more perfect. But this really loud, judgy mind shows up. And so as you sit with it day after day after day, like, you're going to have to do something about it.
Yoga is a very broad idea even. I think there's different kinds of yoga. I heard, he's a famous author, Edwin Bryant. He's written many books. But he's written a book on the Yoga Sutras. But I heard him speaking, and he made a distinction between the yoga of the Bhagavad Gita and then the yoga of Patanjali, and how they're very different applications and even different goals. And the yoga of Patanjali, I think too, it's very philosophical, very esoteric in some ways, and then the yoga of the Bhagavad Gita is very social, you know, and it's all about the social order and maintaining harmony, doing your duty, etc. The yoga of Patanjali is all about going into the forest and and sort of dropping all attachments. So they're kind of radically different goals, and then I would say the most people that we teach aren't really looking for the kind of samadhi that would involve them leaving their body. You know, they're not looking for a complete release. They're looking for an improvement in the overall quality of their life, a release from the maybe negative impact of their thoughts or bad health. So yoga can definitely help. I mean, our practice can definitely help with I think, freeing people from some of the pressure that they're under just from their own sort of conditioning, our own conditioning. And then one of the pressures that happens in our lives is if our health turns bad, it becomes very difficult for us to focus. So asanas can help us become more healthy. So there's no doubt that a daily sadhana, like the kind that we do in Ashtanga yoga, can deliver that. So in speaking higher than that, I can't promise anything. I mean, that would be false of me. Yeah. I mean, what is Ashtanga or any other system really? But it's a set of directions, right? And what is a set of directions? Essentially, you're saying like go north, go south, go east, go west, go left, go right, go up, go down. But there's nothing else to it except that information. And then when you understand whatever practice you're doing as being just essentially information, then you understand whatever other thing is happening there, whatever other experience that's happening with that information is you. it's your projection or your presence or your thoughts. And then when you can understand that that's all of that is you're bringing into it, that can be very potentially very liberating, right? At least for that time that you're doing it, you can really get a deep insight into how you see the world. And I think if we do that enough times for a long enough time, that it helps us get some kind of freedom from our own perspective, the limitations of our own perspective. So when I was younger, I started doing psychedelics at a young age, psychedelic drugs, definitely at too young an age. And but I was really interested. Whenever I would take a drug, you have this different experience of the world. The way that I was thinking of it was like, well, this is always here. I can just see it now. What this drug I've taken, say it was LSD or something, that what the experience that is giving me now is actually, it's a reality that exists, but right now I have that insight, I can see it. And so I became kind of the whole idea of bandwidth, and that our normal sort of consciousness operates within a certain bandwidth, but there was the potential to be seeing so much more. And that idea kind of obsessed me for a long time, from being a teenager into my 20s, and that led me to travel a lot and do a lot more drugs. And then that's what eventually led me into university, because I thought comparative religion, well, at least religion is actually, at its essence, sort of the mystical experience that leads to organized religion is all about that experience, right? That wholeness, or whatever it is, the mystical experience that then is kind of systemized, and that initially people are trying to pass on the experience, right? That transcendence, and then it all becomes about the dogma and the rules, etc. So that's why I wanted to study, and I studied psychology of religion specifically, because that's what I was interested in, the experience, mystical experience. Yeah. Some of those experiences were so profound for me that they're still very clear, and I would say they influenced me more than anything else.